Hi guys, it is Sam, and I am here today to talk about classics. So as you might have remembered a couple weeks ago, I did a my top 5 favorite classic books video, in which I told you guys my favorite pieces of classical literature. So a lot of people were interested in having a video kind of describing like an introduction to classics, like people who aren't, haven't read a lot of classics, don't really know where to begin, feel a little bit daunted by it, etc., that I might do a video kind of pertaining to that topic. So here I am here. You asked, your wish is my command. I am here to talk about classics for beginners. So I think that a lot of people, when they think of classical literature, they get a little bit intimidated. They think of Shakespeare, they think of Dickens, they think of Austen, and they feel like it's a little bit hard and challenging and not interesting, and they just end up not reading it. I mean, there could be many other reasons, they might find the topics boring, etc. But I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of excellent pieces of classical literature. They can be fascinating, they can be interesting, they can be humorous, they can be entertaining. They are pretty much everything that you read now, because, we haven't changed that much as people. We tend to still deal with the same types of topics. So things haven't changed all that much, really just the language and the way in which it is told. When I first started reading classical literature, I too found it to be a little bit boring and a little bit challenging, a little bit daunting. I didn't think the writing was easiest to follow, but I am here to assure you that the more and more you read, the easier it becomes. You just sort of get used to the language, you get used to the way things are written and told, and pretty soon it's just like if you were reading a contemporary novel. You just kind of are able to pick it up, for the most part. I still have a struggle with some classics. So if you're just new to starting out and reading classical literature, if you're thinking about picking it up and if you've kind of thought about it and you don't really know where to begin, well, let me tell you, if you haven't really read very much classical literature, I would not just dive into Dickens or Shakespeare. I would start out with something a little bit easier, I guess you could say, because there are some easier classics out there. My rule of thumb is the older a book or a novel or a story is, the harder you are probably going to find it to read. So I would start with something that is a little bit more modern and then sort of work your way back to the older pieces of literature. Then delve into more Shakespeare and Jane Austen and Dickens and the Greek classics and Chaucer and all of those guys, because you'll kind of be getting a little bit used to it, I think. But if you start out with something that's a little bit newer and a little bit easier to read, and it just would make the whole experience more enjoyable for you, I think. So yes. So I kind of chose 4 books that I think are fairly easy to read, that are classics, that you guys would probably find enjoyable. At least I found them enjoyable, and they're excellent stories from excellent authors, and they are pretty easy to read. So the first book I chose was Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott. This is one of my favorite all-time books. It follows 4 sisters as they grow from childhood to womanhood and their relationships with each other and what happens to them in their lives, and it's just a sweet, sweet, heartwarming tale. It was originally written in 1868 and 1869 by Louisa May Alcott, and it is definitely a classic, and it is definitely really, really good. It is a wonderful story. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and it's a pretty easy read. The writing is not that difficult to follow. It is excellent. So that is my first sort of intro to classical literature book that I would recommend for you guys. Next book I have is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I'm sure it is familiar to many of you guys because it was made into a very famous movie starring Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh, but it was originally published in 1936. Another classic, though more modern than most, such as with Little Woman, but it is an excellent, beautiful story. It follows a young woman, Scarlett, who lives in a plantation in the South. Eventually, of course, the Civil War hits, and it just shows her struggles, not only with what she suffered during the war and having to rebuild her life in the aftermath of the war. A lot happens in this book. It deals with slavery, it deals with racism, it deals with love, there's romance, of course, it deals with hardship, and it deals with loss, and it is just an excellent, excellent book. And again, it's not that hard of a read. It's pretty easy to read the book and follow the language, and I recommend it because you can learn a lot from this book, and it deals with human nature, and Scarlett is a very strong female character, and it is just excellent. That is my second classical recommendation for you guys. The third book that I have for you guys is another more modern tale. It is To Kill a Mockingbird. Originally published in 1960 by Harper Lee. It is an excellent book. I'm sure many of you probably might have read this in school, like a lot of us did. This book is a very important book to read. It is, of course, a classic for a very good reason. It follows human nature, innocence, childhood, racism, just everything, and it is a beautiful, beautiful story. I am sure many of you are familiar with it and have seen the film. It is based on this book, but it is really, really, really good. I recommend it. Again, because it's more of a modern classic, it is, of course, easier to read than some of the older ones, so I highly recommend this one. The next book I have to recommend for you guys is one of my personal favorite series of all time, but that book is Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery, published in 1908. I loved this series of books. In total, there is, I believe, 11 books that take place within surrounding this character and the other characters who come in and out of the book. The really, really, really good book follows the orphan Anne, who is adopted by a brother and sister in Prince Edward Island, and basically how she changes the lives of not only them, but those around her. It's a really, really sweet tale. It is really, really, really good. It's a really easy read, too, and of course it's a classic, so I highly recommend it. Do it. It'll grab your heart and you will fall in love with it, because you cannot help but fall in love with Anne Shirley. Because those are just 4 books that are classics that are easier to read if you're looking to get into more classical literature. I wouldn't ever suggest just diving into Dickens. I love Dickens and I love Austen and Shakespeare and all those, you know, famous authors, but I wouldn't say that if you haven't ever read classics to just dive into it. I would suggest starting with something easier to read, such as one of these books, because you'll just enjoy it more. You'll probably be able to identify with the story and the writing a little bit more. It's written closer to our era, so language is going to be a little bit more accessible to you. Classics are just as good as stories put out by modern authors. We are all human. They have so much held in them that you can learn from and enjoy, and it's just a piece of history to read something written by somebody who lived during the time period in which it took place. Is just utterly fascinating. So don't be daunted by it. Don't be afraid of it. They're not all boring, especially when you read and appreciate the language it was written in a little bit more. It's just really, really good, guys. Give it a chance. I hope this video was able to help some of you not be afraid to jump into reading classical literature. I hope it was kind of what you guys were looking for when you were asking me for this type of a video. It was a little bit hard to think about how to describe classics to others who may not be familiar with the genre. It is my personal favorite genre, but I can totally understand when people say that they find it boring or daunting or inaccessible or any of those things. There's so many books out there and so many stories waiting to be read that are just amazing, and yeah. Like I said, I hope this video made sense, and I hope to help some of you guys out. If you want me to make another video kind of expanding upon this topic, let me know down in the comments. Until my next video, bye! Gotta get some coffee. Drinking out of the TARDIS mug today. Ah, coffee. I am addicted to coffee.